So, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This sounded very promising. I want to take your expectations down. I don't know that much about Paul Engelmann. Very few people do. There are a lot of, you will see, or we will meet during the next few minutes, a lot of dead ends and mysteries that are still to be solved. It seemed he put a lot of effort into putting whatever he built, whatever he did, make it forgotten. And sometimes he was quite successful, so it's a little bit hard to, it's really hard to locate him, but let's see. We start with this. This is a painting. It's hanging in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem by Joshua Neustein. It's from 1970. Engelmann is already dead. Everyone else is already dead. Joshua Neustein is one of the pioneers, maybe the pioneer of Israeli contemporary conceptual art. And this is one of the first paintings, first pieces. It's not really a painting that deals with conceptual art in Israel. And it's called Wittgenstein's Window. And it's interesting for many reasons. The technique is strange. He basically paints a semi-abstract painting of a garden without flowers. And once it's ready, he takes a knife and cuts the painting into stripes. Some of the stripes he cuts diagonally, and then when he hangs them one near the other, they create an illusion of something perspective that's reminding us. How do I do this?
Laura, I need your help.
How do I move it? I'm sorry. We need a minute, but I think all of you can already guess what it reminds us of. Of course, it's the windows in the third quarter. And there are a few questions that rise. How come Wittgenstein and the Wittgenstein house are standing at the very beginning of Israeli conceptual art in the 1970s? How is that a theme? This Neustein painting is one of a whole cycle. All of the cycle is dealing with things around Wittgenstein. There's Wittgenstein's door, Wittgenstein's window, and so on. It's all about cutting and gluing and putting things together again in a different order. It's interesting. And I think at least a part of the question, or maybe a very big part of the question, of the answer to this question, is exactly Paul Engelmann. Paul Engelmann, yes, this is what we were looking for. Who was the architect, the co-architect of the house in the third quarter, but he was much more than that. And most people know him as the other guy near Wittgenstein, but he did many things before that and many things after that. And I will try in the next few minutes to speak as little as possible about this house, because so much has been said about this house and we don't have enough time, I can't. And as much as possible about the other things Paul Engelmann did. Let's see. This is our hero. Seemingly very grayish and, well, let's see. Paul Engelmann is born in 1899 in Olomouc, in today's Czech Republic. He studies and works in Vienna, and from a certain point in 1935 he lives in Tel Aviv, in Haifa and Tel Aviv, and he works in several places in the Middle East. And in many ways these three cities, Olomouc, Vienna, and Tel Aviv form his architectonic and conceptual identity. He's born in 1891 in Olomouc. We said he comes from an interesting family. Of course, he comes from a Jewish family. His father is a small businessman. After the establishment of the Czechoslovak Republic, he becomes an insurance agent. They're not wealthy, not very poor, but they're definitely not wealthy. All their lives they live in a rented apartment in the center of Olomouc, but they're very well connected within the intellectual elite of Olomouc and the whole Moravian region, and that spreads all around Central Europe and beyond. They do weekly literary or musical salons in their living room in the rented flat in Olomouc, and they come from a really interesting family. Engelmann's grand-grandfather from his mother's side is this person. His name is Gideon Berchel, and he's from Brostiev in Moravia, and he's a rabbinical scholar. He's a student of Rabbi Mordechai Bennett, an incredibly important rabbi in Moravia, and he's also a doctor. He's one of the first, some people even say the very first Jew who's allowed to formally study medicine in university. He studies medicine, he writes many medical articles. He opens a network of social clinics for the poor, and at the same time he writes this. He writes polemics about a 12th century book published in classical Arabic, and he writes basically a book about the book. So we have this village doctor, small town doctor from Moravia in the first half of the 19th century, and he's studying classical Arabic, 12th century Arabic, in order to write an answer to this book. So it gives us a hint about who this family is. There are many, many more important people in this family. One of those important people is Moritz Steinschneider, the very first, or one of the very first Central European Orientalists who also studies many living and extinct Semitic languages and writes many important things. But let's return to the 20th century. Engelmann has a brother and a sister, both of them younger than him. The younger one, Peter Engelmann, calls himself Peter Eng, he's a painter, he's doing illustrations, he's doing caricatures, but he lives for a while in the United States. Then he comes back, he marries a wife who's a painter as well, and he's mostly famous for his animated films. He's one of the pioneers of animated film. He makes avant-garde animated films in Vienna, in Berlin, in Copenhagen, and it's totally amazing. He really is. Engelmann's sister, Annie, is a painter, and she's illustrating children's books. She has a very specific language, like aesthetic language, and she works with many important famous authors, but many of her illustrations of classic Czech, German, and other texts for children become a classic themselves and are reprinted again and again till today. Many of these, they're considered classics, and they're still being reprinted and reprinted in those books. You can still buy her illustrations. It's really nice. Let's go back to Engelmann himself. studies at the German gymnasium in Olomouc. In the gymnasium he meets a group of friends. His best friend maybe is from the gymnasium is Max Zweig, the cousin of Stefan, from Prosnitz, from Prostějov. And together they form a network of friends. They're these small town Moravian Jewish teenagers, 19, but they know everyone. They're so well connected, they're well read, well educated, and as the 20th century continues, we meet all those friends in different places in European culture. By 1911, he leaves Olomouc and comes to Vienna and starts studying architecture at the Hochschule. But for very long he's on the train line. He's here and then he goes back to Olomouc. He has some small projects there. He comes back here. He studies. After the first year, he's asking for a leave, and he leaves school for a year to be the secretary, to work as a secretary of Karl Kraus, the famous Karl Kraus. In 1911, while working for Karl Kraus, he writes a poem, publishes a poem in Die Fackel, and the poem is about this house. And unlike all these Viennese clowns who said this house is this, he's writing that this very house is the very first sign of a very new era, 1911. By 1912, he finishes working for Karl Kraus. He returns to Vienna and he applies to Adolf Ross's Baumschule, his private architecture school, and is accepted. And he studies with Ross. Very fast he gains the title of the favorite student of Adolf Ross. He wins all these prizes, he gets the best marks, his works are exhibited. Ross is quoting or showing pictures from his presentations in different occasions, and like many of the students of Ross today, it would be a big ethical problem, but they all work while they're studying, they work at the private office of Adolf Ross as well, of course. And while doing that, surprisingly, the student brings a job to his teacher. And one of his friends, the father of one of his friends from high school, wants to build a house for himself in Olomouc. So he asks his professor, don't you want to build it? And Ross says, sure, let's do it together. It's becoming interesting. And they do it together. The year is 1915, 1916. It's through the war is going on, and it's a very early loss, a very early adult loss. It's still very ornamented, a little bit Art Nouveau, but it already feels brown. It's there, and it's a joint project. Of course, never built. It stays on paper. We know today that it wasn't just Adolf Ross saying, okay, let's start drawing. When they start drawing, the things they start working on are what is at that very time on the table of Engelmann at school, of the student Engelmann. It's his diploma project. And the diploma project of Engelmann is a house on a hilly terrain. And he draws something very similar to this in Mass. And Ross basically goes over the table, looks around, and he says, yes, let's do this. So we have a very interesting teacher-student relationship. It would be very problematic in today's standards, of course. But house on a hilly terrain is something that all students love, of course, because of our plan. It gives a lot of possibilities. Suddenly we can put so many stairs in so many unexpected places. But Engelmann will do so many houses on so many hilly terrains in so many places. It's a thing. It's coming back and back again. This is his first project. It's unrealized, of course. And he does it together with no one else than Adolf Loos. If you would be expecting a boring project as his first project alone, no. But before that, Loos is still here in Vienna. Engelmann is not healthy. He has lung problems, and he cannot be recruited. So he's freed from military service, and during the war there's not much work, and he's semi-recruited for civil help as a drawer in Olomouc in the city hall building department. This will be important soon, but he's drawing sketches for building permits. At the very same time, a certain Ludwig Wittgenstein is recruited and is sent to the artillery school, officers' artillery school in Olomouc to study to be an artillery officer. And a family friend, Adolf Loos, tells Wittgenstein, when you go to Olomouc, you have to meet the Engelmanns. And he does. So they meet during Wittgenstein's military service during World War I in Olomouc. They become close friends. They really do. And they have a very interesting relationship for years after. Wittgenstein, I'll mix them up sometimes, stop me if I do. Engelmann, I said this before, puts a lot of effort into fogging, putting all his work in fog. He doesn't want us to know what he built. Many of his buildings are gone. Many are destroyed, but many are just, we don't know. By the late 1950s, one of his friends basically takes him by the collar, and he says, now, write a list of all the buildings you've built. We need it for history. And Engelmann is not very happy, and at the end of the day, he writes a list. You'll see it, it's somewhere there. It looks as if it's written on a napkin in a cafe. In small handwriting, in a thick, soft pencil. Anyone who studies architecture, anyone who studied architecture with Adolf Loos knows what it means to write with a soft paper, soft pencil. And very unreadable. And even if you manage to somehow decipher it or read what it says like, family house reconstruction, Vienna. Good luck, or addition to the roof, Tel Aviv, Sometimes he gives hints. He's playing with us. But often he doesn't. And the very first thing on that list, the very first built building by Engelmann is a certain House Wittgenstein. 1918. It's not what we're thinking. 1918, Haus Wittgenstein, Neuwaldeck. And he does, we don't have the project, but of course we know the Wittgenstein Palais in Neuwaldeck. And he does a flat reconstruction within the complex for Wittgenstein's sister. Which one? Sorry? Of course. And I looked in many places, I couldn't find a picture or a plan, or if anyone happens to have something, please tell me. But this is the first project Engelmann admits he really realized. And it's a flat for the Wittgenstein family already. Later on, he does another flat for the same sister in Argentinenstrasse. That's not it's not a reconstruction, it's more of an interior. And we don't have a picture of that either, but we know one thing. We know that Ludwig wanted his porcelain collection to be placed with the very specific vitrine that was made by the Vienna Werkstätte, to be placed in his sister's house in Argentinenstrasse. And I think, I'm not sure Engelmann was happy about this, but this specific vitrine, as we know, has found its way to the United States and exhibited in Texas. And it's, yeah. We can imagine what Loss would have said about it. There are a few more projects that we don't know much. There's a specific project for Dr. Winkler. There is a house for an unmarried lady in Vienna. Flat reconstruction for a Dr. Laszlo. We don't know. Another house for a certain Mr. Kantorowicz, but in 1925 there's this thing, and we know the story. And I will not talk about it, because I will not. But I will say two things. In the big debate of how much did Wittgenstein have his hands deep into this and how much did Engelmann have his hands, I personally think Engelmann had more than we think. And there are two interesting insights that we might want to remember. One is the first sketches of the house before Wittgenstein started entering, before Wittgenstein enters the project, are very similar to how the house is today. And these are by Engelmann alone. And they're very lost, more lost, but they're very, very similar. That's one thing. But the other insight that's even more interesting is that that project as well comes from another project he did during his second year at the Bauschule with Adolf Loos. So architecture students, be careful what you do. Second, third, fourth year. And that building, the theme that Adolf Loos gave was even more interesting. It was variation on a Mediterranean house. And with young student, Engelmann does his project that Loos liked very much for a variation of a Mediterranean house. Then he uses that project as the basis for this thing. And very soon, he'll be building real Mediterranean houses on the shores of the Mediterranean. So, be careful what you do in your second year. I said I'm not talking about this one, I'm not. I'm just saying that after the building was finished, or almost finished, everyone is very, very tired. Some people leave. Jacques Groac, who was Engelmann's friend from Olomouc, an architect by himself, who does he works there as the controlling architect that comes to check, is very upset. Engelmann doesn't say he's upset, but he leaves to Olomouc right away. He returns back home. Loss, after a while, not connected with this, leaves to France, and at the same time he's building Haus Moller here in Vienna, and he's asking the same Jacques Groac, why don't you do the controlling officer for that house? So he stays here, and this will get interesting because all lines will meet again. But Engelmann returns to Olomouc, and he gets, today I would say an email, but he gets a call from an old, not a friend, from a boss. During the war, remember, he was working at the building office of the city hall. The chief of the building office, a certain engineer called Miller, Vladimir Miller, calls Engelmann and says, why don't you build my own family house? Of course, Engelmann says yes. Now, this is remarkable for many, many reasons. First of all, the guy, the head of the building construction office at the city hall is the guy all the architects are afraid of. He's the guy who's putting the stamps on building permits. But he's more than that. He's setting his vision on how the city should look like in the next decade or decades. And by taking someone as radical, or maybe we should say radically conservative, as Engelmann is, for the project, he says to everyone around, look, this is how I want Olomouc to look in a few years. And it's interesting. Now, I'm saying loss. Engelmann does a total loss project. It looks as if Loss did it. Totally. So similar in so many ways, and he does it very, very well. There are a few small minor differences that we might look at, but we might see, but I don't know. Let's see. This is important. A few points about Engelmann architecture that we should say, and this is a good opportunity. Engelmann sees architecture first and foremost as a moral responsibility. It's something that has to do with society, with being moral, and only, almost even I would say religious. And only after that, it's a form of art or craft. Just like his teacher, he says buildings should grow, should develop from within to the outside. The inside of the building should reflect, writes Engelmann himself, the needs, the identity, the emotions, and the social relations of the people who live in the house. And only after that is solved correctly, it should be packed in an envelope that we can call a facade, but the facade will be sort of banal. The big drama, like all of the houses of Adolf Loos, the facade is banal. Sometimes you don't understand why the windows dance in a funny way. But the big drama is once you enter and you see how each floor is elsewhere. Yes. He changes a little bit later, but for very long he's against what he calls shallow modernism. He says, I don't want buildings to be modern for the sake of modernism. In a funny way, he's very radical. He's radical in a very conservative way. He hates using colorful glass. He doesn't like to use metal. He likes traditional materials. He's very strict. On one hand, of course, he's a functionalist. But unlike his contemporaries, he doesn't say all art history books we should burn and we shouldn't look at anything. He digs a lot from Semper, from Mediterranean houses, from Greek and Roman architecture, but he takes it his way. Just like Loss, he loves using natural materials. Of course, he doesn't use ornament. Ornament is a sin, but he loves using ornamented wood, stone, or marble. Unlike his teacher, he's not so obsessive with expensive, exotic materials. He doesn't need exotic wood and onyx and green marble. He's totally fine with local stone and pine tree. And he says this is beautiful enough. This specific house, the Miller Villa, still owned by the family, was recently reconstructed very beautifully and returned to how it was built. As a matter of fact, he says, in a letter he's corresponding with Vladimir Miller, with the client, and he says, every material should be used according to the material's nature and to what it likes to be. And in this, then this is fascinating, it basically is almost more than half a century ahead of another great Jewish architect, Louis Kahn, who said, let's ask the brick what it wants to be. So Engelmann already is asking the marble and stone and the wood and the bricks what they want to be, how they feel well. It really has a fascinating ground plan inside. It looks totally as something Gross would have done, and if we look close at the windows and the doors, we might recognize something we might know from the Wittgenstein house. 1929, he does a competition for a bathhouse in Opava with 85 other competitors. He gets a second or third prize. The building is not built. One of the people he's competing against is his friend from high school, Groag, who worked with him on the Wittgenstein house here. In 1929, he builds a villa for a certain Mr. Beckman in Ostrava, Merish Ostrau. Destroyed. Plans are gone. We don't have it. We have the address, but we don't have anything else. In 1932, he builds a house for Josef Gutmann, also in Merish Ostrau, northern Bohemia, northern Silesia, really. And this Gutmann person is an interesting guy. He's a socialist news journalist. He becomes a communist. He's one of the founders of the Czechoslovak Communist Party, but still he wants to have his own round plan. Unfortunately, the house suffered, it was bombed during World War. Ostrava is this big industrial center. It was bombed by the Germans and the Americans, and the house suffered several times. It was bombed and then reconstructed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and very little of what it was is still there, but a little bit, maybe. His biggest and most interesting project is this one, 1930. And this is really fantastic. A certain Benedict Lieberman, who is an enlightened capitalist in Polish Galicia, in the city of Stanislavov. Today it's known as Ivano-Frankivsk. It was Poland then, today it's the Ukraine. Owns a liquor factory. It's one of the biggest liquor factories in Poland at the time. And his wife is a distant relative of the Engelmanns. It's again this network of people who know each other through cultural and family reunions. But he reads about all these ideal utopian cities, worker cities. He reads about the Weissenhof neighborhood in Stuttgart. He reads about Zlin in Moravia. He reads about the Siedlungs here in Vienna. And his wife comes back from Olomouc and says, I have the architect for you. They meet, and basically he gives him this project. It's a small city, basically. It's a big architectonic urban project for the workers of the alcohol distillery and different clerks of the company to live in. So he has houses, a kindergarten, a school, a clinic, a cultural space, something like a small commercial center. It's an urban project, and it's real houses. Lieberman gives him 2 helpers, 2 fresh graduates from the Polytechnic University in Warsaw. I have the names, but it's not so important. Jerzy Berliner and Henrik Odenfeld. And he calls the colony Neue Hauser in German. And refers to Weissenhof, literally. Now, Engelmann takes this very seriously. He looks at the buildings, he plans the buildings, he has a business plan for the people to pay their own rent, and basically manages to build the most amazing, the most interesting, the most modern building in Stanislavov, in Ivano-Frankivsk, for years after. Each house is delivered to the tenants with carpets, curtains, shelves, tables, fully furnished. All the houses have refrigerators. This is 1930. 1930, and we're close we're at the very, very end of Poland, a few kilometers from the Soviet border. 1930, there was hunger on the other side of the border, real hunger. People are fascinated about this. He deals with gardens. It's a real garden city. Every house has its own garden, so that the people can grow their own tomatoes or potatoes, so that to help make a living. He has exhibitions coming and being exhibited in the school building. He has experts coming from Warsaw explaining all kinds of things, giving lectures about modern architecture to the people. And even, this is one of the houses. This facade is remarkable. Of course, all the flats have a very simple but very effective round plan, still very much lost. And he has a very smart business plan where basically on each lot you have 4 houses built. 2 of them on the lower floor, 2 of them on the upper floor. Each one has an entrance through the garden. By this, he's basically cutting city taxes to 4, but having 4 independent flats with 2 communal gardens on both sides of the building. Very architectonically thinking. This is Engelmann's drawing. This is handwriting. He's very much into gardens. This is how it looks like. In 1931, where is that? The Polish premier of the German avant-garde science fiction urbanist film, Die Stadt von Morgen, Miasta Jutra in Polish, is projected. The Polish premiere is in Stanislavov, in this place in Neuhauser, projected on, it's in the summer, projected on one of those blind facades. And it's an event for the whole city. The only enemy of this is the city hall. They don't like it, they make it very problematic. Eventually, they start building over 130 houses, but only 10 are finished. So less than 10%. Nevertheless, those 10 houses that were built survived the war, survived communism, and are still there and are still considered very good houses. Interestingly, these houses remind us of a project built in the 1950s in southern Jaffa by Kurt Unger, Engelmann's collaborator from Haifa. We'll be talking about him soon, and it's exactly the same. It's 4 flats on one building lot with 4 different entrances, 2 from below, one here, one on the other side, and then staircase to the other flat above and from the other side as well, and they share two neighbors, this one and that one from there, share one garden here and the opposite on the other side. Unfortunately, it looks really cool in the model. It doesn't look so cool in reality. But it's still, I mean, it's alive. Okay. By 1932, he's back in, before that, one more. I don't have this from anywhere. It's my own fault. But I think being in Stanislav, being in the Galician part of the Ukraine, of Poland, for so long, building this thing there, did something to Engelmann. Meeting, at the time, over more than one-third of the people who lived in Stanislav were Jews. But they were not the Jews he knew from Olomouc. They were mostly religious, ultra-religious, poor, Hasidic. There are 3 important Hasidic dynasties that come from Stanislav. One is called the Stanislav dynasty. All 3 of them are very mystical, Kabbalistic, totally not analytical. And this meeting with these people, with poor, extremely religious, mystic Jews, must have, I think, I don't know, must have done something to him. I keep thinking about Kafka meeting the Yiddish theater in Prague. That's also come from, they came from Russia. But I don't know, I really don't know. 1932, he starts in 1932. He does his last project in Europe. He's back in Olomouc, and he does a small house for a certain Elinor Goldman. Elinor Goldman is a 20-something-year-old law student, and her uncle has a big villa, and he cuts off a piece of land from his garden, gives it to Elinor. It's 9 meters by 10. And on this lot, Engelmann builds a 2-floor house for Elinor Goldman, with a very gentle, very small ground plan. The whole thing is very small, but it's fantastic. It's a real fantastic house, unfortunately destroyed not by bombs, but by reconstructions in the 1970s and 1980s. We're here. In the years to come, all the human fabric around Engelmann is cracking and being destroyed. Many people flee from Europe, many people go away. Those who manage go to England, go to Switzerland, go to America. When the war starts, people run faster. From all the people we met so far, and we can go through the whole list, everyone, the clients, the people who are giving, the builders, the family members, everyone. They run to England, they go to the States, they are killed, they are transported, they commit suicide. The whole social, cultural fabric disappears. And in 1934, he arrives in Haifa. He leaves to Haifa. And it's interesting. It's a totally different place. And he, just like many other refugees, cultural refugees, from Central Europe, find themselves in a specific situation. They lose all their social contacts, they lose their culture, they lose their language abilities suddenly, because they're in a different society, and many times they physically lose. They're without family and without money. And they're trying to reconstruct what they lost in this weird, strange Mediterranean hell. Everything is against them, but they have one small, but one important, maybe, one advantage. When we want to do, when we have to build a functionalist avant-garde building in Europe, in Vienna, in Prague, in Olomouc, we get in line in the street with a Baroque house and an Art Nouveau house and a neoclassical house and all these princesses that are holding the balconies, and we have to deal with that. We have to react to that proportion and to all of that. Everything that Los hates so much. All that decadent, corrupt ornament that is a sin. And there you have to do your abstract, white, geometric thing. Suddenly here, you're not confronted with all of that. You don't have Baroque. You have white sand, blue sky, and the sea. That's all. And you can do your abstract thing. House, near a house, near a house, and suddenly the streets of 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, Haifa, Tel Aviv, even Jerusalem, look like a textbook of the Bauhaus. And that is exactly what destroyed them. Because here when you see this big street with all the Baroque and Art Nouveau and princesses, and suddenly you see a functionalist house, you say, wow, you can't unsee it. But once you see a whole street with abstract, you stop seeing it. And people stopped seeing it until the 1980s, 90s, and if someone might ask, why did they destroy so many of Engelmann's houses, this is the part of the reason. Because they didn't see them. He lives in Haifa for a while, rented in a room in someone's flat, and very soon he moves to Tel Aviv. This is what I mean by house after house after house, avant-garde, near avant-garde, near avant-garde. Without the houses of Europe. And it's here in Tel Aviv. This is nice.
Oh, all of us.
That he meets. Okay, yes. Max Zweig, his school friend from Olomouc, says you're going to Palestine, you should talk with Dr. Arthur Waxenberger. Dr. Arthur Waxenberger is an art historian from Opau. He keeps, Engelmann and all his friends keep together before these German-speaking Jews, but mostly with Czech, German-speaking Jews from Bohemia. Opava, Prosnitz, all those things. And he's an interesting guy. He's from Opava. He studies art history here in Vienna. He's an expert in the 1920s on Far Eastern art, Far Eastern ceramics and porcelain. Part of this is his company in Palestine. But a part of his collection is today, a big part of his collection is today in the Waldmuseum here in Vienna. A lot of it. But he came to Palestine in 1931 and he establishes this company called the Cultivated Home. He has branches in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, and in Jerusalem, and he's selling lamps and furniture to whoever buys them. But he also has an architect service that he would send an architect to your home, and the architect would plan your interior to have it cultivated. He mostly caters to higher-ranking British Army officers and to some upper middle class Jewish immigrants from Central Europe. And he gives work to Engelmann right away. And Engelmann starts doing these interiors one after the other. And basically, he works for this company until he dies. He does some other things, but this is what he does in Palestine. From the a few weeks after he arrives until he's dead. These are pictures from the catalog of the Cultivated Home. Luckily. Okay, let's go. I'll do it fast. There is, of course, once anti-Jewish procedures are happening in Germany, people don't want to buy German products in Palestine, so he can't import Viennese furniture because people don't want to buy that, so they start to produce local Wiener Werkstätte in Palestine. Waxenberger not only gives him a job, he also provides him with accommodation, and this is where it becomes interesting. This is a building in Hadam Street in Tel Aviv, and this is where Engelmann lives. It's not even a flat. Of course, there's a housing crisis. Refugees are coming a little bit before the war, through the war, throughout the war, and after the war. Basically, shiploads. And there's a housing crisis. There's not enough place to live, so people live in all kinds of temporary solutions. And one of those temporary solutions is a solution that some city halls allow. You can build temporary dwellings on rooftops. And he gets this one-room apartment, temporary one-room apartment, on a rooftop of a building. Most people left those houses in the late 1940s. He stays here until he's dead, until 1965. Not only that, By 1937, Max Zweig, his friend from high school, manages to leave Europe and comes to join him. They live there together. Zweig lives in the kitchen, it's a kitchenette. He lives in the room, it's his office, it's his library, and it's his house. It's not even a flat. It's amazing. I should do this fast, so I'll go over this. This is not so important. It's important, but maybe later. This is interesting. His first big project is in Haifa, a house for the Yadlin family. And this is his first sketch. This is the house in the 90s. And we can't open the video. I see, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. No. Yeah. Wow. Now, it's okay, it's okay. The house is destroyed in 1994. Luckily, just before it's destroyed by the city, someone from the Haifa City Hall gets an idea and he sends an architecture student up to the building. The bulldozers are literally standing outside already. And why don't you take a few photos? Why don't you make some measurements? Why don't you do some sketches? And he's there for a while, for a few hours, and he does this file. Just before the house is destroyed. And you can see the house. This file was done by the Haifa City Hall in 1995, 94. And we can see, again, a total loss Raumplan, very abstract, very raw, with an interesting addition. A house on a hilly terrain, remember? Mediterranean, overlooking the Mediterranean, really. It's fantastic. This, we can really see loss here, right? Totally in the interior. You see the library, and we can see the ship-like round window, which is surprising. Now, let's look at the plan again. These are the original building plans. And this really looks like something lost to us, right? Totally. All but this. This is something we never find before. It looks more like something French. What's that? How come this happens in Haifa, of all places? And my answer is, now I need to get to the next page. Architecture historians, often in second year of architecture, tell this funny story, which is a story, but it's based on something. It says, functionalist architecture, this is where you study functionalist architecture, second year, is basically, there are two models. There's the factory and the ship. Both things that light up the imagination of people in the 1920s and 30s. Industrialization, in industry and transportation. The factory demonstrated with houses from Tel Aviv, basically takes industrialist aesthetics, adopts it. It's very square, it's functional, it looks like a factory, it has these linear windows and so on. The ship, on the contrary, is quoting something else. It's aerodynamic, it's about travel, it's about this transatlantic steamboat. So it has round balconies and round windows and all this sailing and even space, like aerodynamic. It's a bit aerodynamic. You might think about Eric Mendelssohn, of course. Now, this is Jerusalem. The other ones are Tel Aviv and Haifa. Now, interestingly, if we look statistically at functionalist buildings in Vienna, in Prague, in Berlin, most functionalist buildings that we see are factories. And very few are steamboats. You find once in 100, you can find them, but very few. Once you're in Tel Aviv, it's almost the opposite. Every other house is a steamboat, and then once in a while you find a factory. And the question is why? And the answer is, if in Prague and Vienna and Berlin and Paris, the steamboat is this sunny Sunday afternoon, going on a ship on the Danube with wine and food and music and jazz. For Central European architects in Haifa and Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the ship is a literal ship that brings them from Europe that's burning to a safe haven. It's something that, whether it's intentional or unintentional, but they refer to. It's an important point in their individual biography. They move from some place that's gone to another place. Maybe, I don't know. The fact is that you find so many more steamships in Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jerusalem than you'd find them in Prague or Vienna or Berlin. And even Engelmann, who never did a round thing, suddenly starts doing them. We have more of them. More and more and more. This is nice. Okay, we don't have much time, but one of the guys who's working with Engelmann in Israel is this guy, Kurt Unger. Kurt Unger is his friend from Bohemia. He's from Falkenau. He's not from his hometown, but surprisingly, he's also a student of the Adolf Loos school. A few years later, they're not from the same year, but they have the same teacher. They meet each other, they do some projects together. First, they do competition for a master plan for the city of Akko, Saint Jean d'Acre, in northern Israel. They lose. Then they do a competition. These are works by Unger, still in the Czech Republic. He does a house for his father. He does some flats and interiors in Pilsen. He does something in Brno. This is what he did for his father. And it's really nice because in the drawings he knew exactly what furniture his father had. Right? It's the same. Right? And this is Engelmann and Unger sitting in a cafe. And interestingly, you can see not only the generational difference. Unger is approximately 8 years younger, but you could see Engelmann adopts to the climate, to the social standards, and is dressed totally different, but Engelmann still sits in this cafe in Tel Aviv as if he was in Vienna. They do a competition for the market, the central market in Haifa, and they lose. This is the guy who won. And there are two projects I will talk about very briefly that Engelmann did not build. And if it would have been anyone else, he would be extremely bitter, but Engelmann is not the type, it's just, he doesn't care. One is the Fleischner house in Haifa. Dr. Fleischner is a Jewish Viennese doctor here in Vienna. One of his patients is Adolf Loos. 1931, he leaves to Palestine. And he asks his patient, why don't you, he already buys a lot on the Carmel in Haifa, and he asks Loos to plan a house. Loos does the first sketches already. It's about to be built, but then there's a change of plan. Fleischner is employed in a hospital in Jerusalem, and he just puts the thing aside. He says, I'll build it in 2 or 3 years when I go back to Haifa. By the time he goes back to Haifa, Loos is not alive anymore. So he's looking for an architect to take his place. It's obvious you have the best student, the favorite student of Loos, just a few streets away from him. But no, he takes someone else. And that someone else was a completely different building. So there's no Loos building in Haifa anymore. The second project is similar, the Moller family, the same Moller family that built the Moller house here in Vienna, that is today the residence of the Israeli ambassador. They're from northern Bohemia, they're from Nahod, they have a textile factory, and one of their cousins who has this crazy idea, why don't we open a branch of the textile factory in Palestine? Everyone in the family thinks it's totally crazy, but eventually it becomes the biggest employer in the Middle East. They buy Egyptian cotton, they sell socks and tents to the British Army, and it's a huge textile factory until the 1980s. And he builds a lot. He builds a small city, he builds a factory, he builds accommodations for the workers, he builds a villa for the Moller family. This is the villa for the Moller family, this is the Villa Moller in Kiryat Atta. It's the Atta company, of course. And when the Moller family, now, of course, the Moller family is heavily associated with Adolf Loos. Loos builds the house for them in Vienna, he builds houses for their workers at the factory, near the factory in Nahod, in northern Bohemia. It's obvious when they arrive to Palestine, they will ask Loos to build the house again, or at least his ambassador. And they even ask their house to look like their old house in Vienna. The instructions they give to the architect is, make this like our house, Villa Moller, here in Vienna. And they take someone else. And that someone else says, yeah, sure, I'll do it like that. And this is how it becomes. So, where else? Right? Now, anyone else, I think, would be extremely bitter and annoyed. It doesn't look like Engelmann is angry at all. He's totally, I don't know. I really don't know. A few things about coffee house culture. But this is not about architecture. One of the few things that these people, Central European intellectuals, bring from Europe, from the coffee houses of Vienna and Berlin to Tel Aviv is the coffee house culture. That was a very much, maybe still is, but definitely until the 1970s, 80s was a thing. Coffee houses were the places where poets and writers and painters and literary and theater people were meeting and writing. Most of contemporary Israeli literature from the 1930s until the 80s was written literally in coffee houses. And you have all these kinds of coffee houses where all kinds of groups meet. I remember my grandfather going to one coffee house every Thursday, and it was only for Hungarian-speaking Slovak dentists. And the whole coffee house was full. It was full. All the Hungarian-speaking Slovak dentists reserved the whole coffee house. And there were people meeting from specific towns, from specific professions, from specific identities, and there were programs. There were musical programs. There were people reading poetry, reading literature, And our friend Engelmann, with his roommate, an old friend from high school, Max Zweig, are organizing the same thing in Café Tchelet. Now, from all the cafes in Tel Aviv, you can see, we can compare this to Vienna, but interior-wise, they look very much different than Café Central or Café Museum here in Vienna. I'm not comparing that, I know. Café Tchelet is of all these great, amazing cafes where you had the sports, is the most strict, Teutonic, harsh one. They speak only German. It's the most poets don't go there. They do literally evenings there. We have, this is how it looks like. We have an ad published in a newspaper saying it was vegetarian and vegan already from the 1930s. The menu was set up by a famous dietitian and herbalist. I sort of can feel how it was inside. There he works with another, again, they restore their network of people. This is Josef Schechter. With Josef Schechter he's writing different things. The most important thing is, now I need the PDF again. How are we with time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes is exactly what. But the first published text about Wittgenstein is by Engelmann, the first published in Hebrew, of course. The first published text in Hebrew about Wittgenstein is by Engelmann. The first published text in Hebrew about Karl Kraus is by Engelmann. The first published text about Adolf Loos is by Engelmann. This is from his book that he writes together with Josef Schechter that we saw before. And, okay, published is a big word. Remember, he lives in this small room on the roof, and he basically writes the whole thing on a typewriter, but he adds his own, and this is, the first part is a translation of Loos, with his own illustrations. Fantastic. And the second one, even more interesting, is the implication of the theory of Adolf Loos in Israel. And there he talks again about views, about light, about gardens, about the interior and the exterior combined, and we see things that we meet, of course, Lido in Venice, but also, again, he's not talking about his own things, he's talking about Unger, his friend. This is a house by Unger in Ramat Gan, I think. And he's talking again about the importance of small gardens where people can grow their own tomatoes and potatoes and so on. There's a lot more in this, but that's a completely different lecture. The one last thing is the fairy tale for the end. And this is really a fairy tale. And here there are so many questions. By 1947, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan is established. The newly crowned king of Jordan needs a throne room. A room where he can do what kings do. Official things. Receive ambassadors, ministers, and so on. It's called the throne room. And he contacts Engelmann. Of all people. Now there are so many questions here. First question is, this is 1947. The Israeli-Arab conflict is already very heavy and fiery and bloody. It's not the naive days of the 1920s. Why would he want, in a way I understand, these are the first days of the Jordanian Empire, the Jordanian kingdom, and he probably needs to build an identity, a national identity that's liberal and European and Western. And it's interesting that he sees a Jewish, Austrian, Czech architect as the carrier of this message. But how did he find him? Engelmann is not well known then, for sure not today, but he's not well known. And for me, the most fascinating thing is, I'm just trying to imagine how Engelmann wakes up in the morning in his room on the roof, puts on his suit, takes a bus to Jerusalem, takes another bus to the crossing on the Dead Sea, and by early evening is with the King of Jordan, discussing, on a business meeting, discussing drawings. It's like a fairy tale. Now, it's not totally sure how much of the project was finished. It could very well be that it stopped at some point. This is one of the enigmas. We do know how the throne room looked like in 1947. And I mean, yes, it's functionalist. It's European, it's Western, it's liberal, is that what the king wanted? I'm not totally sure. I mean, this is so maybe it was only partly finished, maybe it was done only partly, maybe this is it. Maybe this is so minimalist that this is what it could be that this is it. You could see that at some point someone felt this is too little and we should add something, right? Because this is, I understand. At some point he got another job to build the first room of the Jordanian parliament. I know a parliament sounds, the room is approximately 1/3 of the size of this room. This is a reconstruction of that parliament, but most probably this is already how it looked in the 1960s and not in Engelmann's design.
We need to stop.
I stop. I finished with this. Thank you very much.
Could go on and I think we could listen to you, but we can have you back another time. I actually don't think we have time for questions today, sadly, because we've got our next talk was already 5 minutes away. But thank you so much, and I'm sure we'd love to have you back in another way and to take even in more detail. So thank you, Dan. That's absolutely.
Thank you so much.